Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have started a series of videos on data structures and algorithms. This series of videos will help you to understand the basic concepts of data structures. In my previous videos, I have discussed what is data structure, what are the types of data structure, what is the need of data structure, why we should learn data structure, what is an algorithm, what are the characteristics of algorithm, what is time complexity, what is space complexity, what is asymptotic notations, what are pointers. All these things were covered in my previous videos. The links of my previous videos are provided in the description box. You can check the links and watch those videos. Now let's start this video. In this video I am going to explain about in details about memory allocations. Now let us understand what is memory allocation. Memory allocation is a process by which computer programs and services are assigned with physical or virtual memory space. The memory allocation is done either before or at the time of program execution. So basically there are two types of memory allocation. First is the compile time or static memory allocation, and next is the runtime or dynamic memory allocation. Now let us understand what is static memory allocation. In static memory allocation, whenever the program executes, it fixes the memory size of the program, which can't be changed further. So the exact memory requirements must be known before. In static memory allocation, allocation and deallocation of memory are done by the compiler automatically. And when everything is done at compile time or before runtime, it is called static memory allocation. Execution is faster in static memory allocation in compared to the dynamic memory allocation. And here in static memory allocation, variables gets allocated permanently. Now let us understand the advantages of static memory allocation. So static memory allocation are basically simple to use, and the allocation and deallocation of the memory are basically done by the compiler. It has an efficient execution time, and static memory allocation they uses stack data structures. Now let us understand the disadvantages of static memory allocation. The first disadvantages is that the memory space is wasted in static memory allocation. The second disadvantage is that exact memory requirements must be known before execution. The third disadvantage is that once the memory is initialized, it can't be resized further. And the fourth disadvantage is that static memory allocation cannot be reused. So these are some of the disadvantages of static memory allocations. Now, what is dynamic memory allocation? In dynamic memory allocation, size, initialization and allocation are done by the programmer. It is managed and served with pointers that point to the newly allocated memory space in an area which is called the heap. So basically, heap memory is unorganized and it is treated as a resource when we require the use of it, if not release it. When everything is done during runtime or execution time, it is known as dynamic memory allocation. We can reallocate memory size if needed. In dynamic memory allocation, there is no wastage of memory. Basically, we implement dynamic memory allocation with the help of two functions, calloc and malloc. Now let us understand the advantages of dynamic memory allocation. So the dynamic memory allocation is done at runtime. So we can allocate or create additional storage whenever we need them. Memory can be deallocated, that means we can free or delete the dynamic space whenever we are done with them. So thus one can always have exactly the amount of space required. So no more, no less. Memory size can be reallocated if needed. So these are some of the advantages of dynamic memory allocation. Now let us understand the disadvantages of dynamic memory allocation. So as the memory is allocated during runtime, it requires more time. Memory needs to be freed, that means the memory needs to be released by the user when it is done. So the compiler does not allocate or deallocate the memory in dynamic memory allocation. Basically, the programmer needs to do both the allocation and deallocation of the memory. So these are few disadvantages of dynamic memory allocation. Now let us have a look at the difference between static and dynamic memory allocations. The first point is that in static memory allocation, the memory is allocated at compile time, whereas in dynamic memory allocation, memory is allocated at runtime. So execution is faster in static memory allocation in compared to the dynamic memory allocation, whereas this execution is slower in dynamic memory allocation. Static memory allocation uses stacked data structure for managing the static allocation of memory, whereas dynamic memory allocation they use heap data structure for managing the dynamic allocation of memory. Static memory allocation are less efficient, whereas dynamic memory allocation are more efficient. Static memory allocation, the memory cannot be reused, whereas dynamic memory allocation, the memory can be reused, and once it is used, it can be freed, it can be released when it is not required. Once the memory is allocated in static memory allocation, the memory size cannot be changed. Whereas in dynamic memory allocation, when the memory is allocated, the memory size can be changed. So one of the example of static memory allocation is the array data structure, whereas the example of dynamic memory allocation is the linked list. Thank you everyone for watching the video till the end. Like, share and subscribe for more videos.